I'm Helen Reyes, 45, and I spent 23 years in uniform, watching the sky so the people underneath it could sleep. For 11 of those years, I carried one promise and one mission, building the satellite that would finally close the gap that took my brother. But on the most important night of my career, with the entire countdown holding for my word, a major I had never met put his hand on my arm and ordered me off the floor. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea who you were in the one room you had earned the right to stand in? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you are tuning in from. And if you have ever had to stand your ground after being underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe. Daniel came into the world the winter I turned 8, and from the first night I held him, I had someone to point at the sky for. We lived in a flat part of the country where there was nothing to look at but the sky, and so that was what we looked at. Our father bought a cheap telescope from a catalog the year I was 10, a wobbly thing with a cracked focus knob, and I learned to aim it before Daniel could even walk. By the time he was 4, he would tug my sleeve at dusk and point straight up, and I would carry him out to the back step and we would wait for the first star together. I want you to understand who we were before any of this, because the people who tell stories like mine usually start at the moment everything went wrong. I would rather start at the back step, with a little boy in my lap and the whole bowl of the sky going dark above us. That is where the promise started, even if neither of us had the words for it yet. Daniel was the dreamer, I was the steady one. He would ask me 100 questions about what was up there, and I would answer the 10 I knew and make up nothing for the rest, because even then I could not stand to say a thing I was not sure of. He thought that was funny. He used to say I was the only person he knew who would rather say nothing than say something that might be wrong. I told him that was the whole point of me. He laughed like he always did, and the laugh is the part I miss most now, more than his face even. When I left for the Air Force Academy at 18, Daniel was 10, and he cried at the bus the way only a little brother cries, furious about it and trying to hide it. I told him I was going to go learn the sky for real. He told me to bring some of it back for him. I did not know yet how much I would end up carrying. I picked space operations when the time came, and I picked it on purpose. People hear Air Force and they picture a cockpit, a flight suit, a man with a scarf, and a 1,000-yard look. I picked the part of the service that watches the whole sky so the people underneath it can sleep. There is no scarf for that. There's a darkened room and a console and a screen that you do not get to look away from, and the entire reward for doing it perfectly is that nothing happens and no one ever knows your name. I was good at it almost immediately, and I think it was because of the back step. I had spent my childhood learning to watch the sky for someone I loved. The military just gave me a bigger sky and more people to love. My first real assignment put me on missile warning ground systems. If you have never heard of them, that is on purpose, and it is the point. There are satellites that sit very high and very still and watch the Earth for the hot bloom of a launch, anywhere. And they pass what they see to people like me. And people like me decide in seconds what it means and who needs to know. When I was a young captain, an older officer sat me down on my first overnight and told me the truth of the work. Nobody throws a parade for the people who catch the thing before it lands, he said. Get used to that. I did. I was 26, and I had already gotten used to being the person whose value you only notice when she is gone. I made captain at 26 and major at 30, and through all of it, the work was the same. The patient, unglamorous watching, the discipline of being right when being right is invisible. I learned that there is a particular kind of courage in a job where your best day looks exactly like your most boring one. I learned to find that boring day beautiful. Daniel went a different way. He enlisted in the Army at 19 in 2008, and he did it grinning, because of course he did. He was ground, infantry, the opposite of his sister and her quiet screens. The night before he shipped, we sat out back one more time, both of us in uniform for the first time, his new and stiff and mine worn soft. He looked up at the sky he had made me promise to bring home, and then he looked at me, and he said the thing I have carried every day since. You watch the sky, he said. I will watch the ground. Between us we have got the whole thing covered. I told him that sounded like a fair split. He told me not to let anything sneak up on him from above. I told him I would not. I meant it the way you mean things you do not yet know you will be held to. We were 2 kids in 2 uniforms making a joke out of a promise, and the promise turned out to be the realest thing either of us ever said. That was the bond. A big sister and a little brother and a cracked telescope and a sky we divided between us. Half for him on the ground and half for me overhead. I have spent the years since learning exactly what my half was worth and exactly what it costs when it fails. But that came later. On that last night out back, the sky was just the sky, and my brother was just my brother, alive and laughing and certain that between the two of us, nothing could get through. I believed him. For 7 more years, I let myself believe him. And then I spent the rest of my life making sure that the thing he trusted me to watch would never again come too late. The kind of person I am was set on that back step long before any of it was tested. Quiet, sure, watching. I would not change it, not even now, not even knowing where the watching would take me, because the watching is the only thing I had to give him, and in the end, it was the thing I gave. The cost came in 2015, and it came the way these things always come, on an ordinary day, through an ordinary phone, in a voice trying very hard to stay level. I was 34, I was a major by then, deep in the work, the kind of officer who knew the systems cold. And the system that should have watched over my brother's unit did not see the thing coming soon enough. I am not going to dramatize what happened to Daniel. He would have hated that, and so would I. What I will tell you is the number, because the number is the whole story. The warning that should have reached his unit reached it 90 seconds late. 90 seconds. I have spent 11 years thinking about 90 seconds. You can hold your breath for 90 seconds. You can cross a parking lot, read a page, miss a turn. 90 seconds is nothing, and 90 seconds was everything. And on the day it mattered most, the sky I had promised to watch blinked at the wrong moment, and my little brother paid for it. They folded a flag into a triangle and put it in my mother's hands. I stood beside her in my dress uniform, and I did not cry, because I had already learned how not to, and because somewhere underneath the grief, a colder thing had already started to form. Not anger. Anger burns off. This was the other thing, the thing that does not burn off. A decision. I knew standing there that I was going to spend whatever was left of my career making sure no other sister stood where I was standing because a warning came 90 seconds late. I did not announce it. I did not make a speech. That is not who I am. I just went back to work and I started steering, quietly, deliberately, toward the part of the enterprise that was building the next generation of eyes, the satellites that would replace the old ones, the constellation designed from the ground up to close exactly the gap that had opened over my brother. I made lieutenant colonel in 2016 and moved into acquisition and operations for that new system. It was slow, maddening work, the kind that happens in conference rooms and test ranges and budget fights, years of it, with no rocket and no glory, just the grinding effort of dragging a thing that does not exist yet into existence. I was good at that too. It turns out the same patience that lets you watch an empty screen for 12 hours lets you fight a 10-year fight for a single satellite. I had the patience. I had the reason. I had 90 seconds living behind my sternum every single day. In 2019, the Space Force stood up, and I transferred in and became a guardian. People made jokes about the name. I did not. I had been guarding something my whole career, and finally the name on the door matched the work. I pinned on Colonel in 2022. By then I was not just on the program. I was becoming the person it would answer to. There is a role on a launch that most people have never heard of, the same way most people have never heard of missile warning. It is called the Launch Decision Authority. On the kind of launch I am talking about, a national security launch with a payload that matters to the whole country, one human being holds the final word. Not a computer, not a committee, a person. Every system can be green, every checklist complete, every light on every board the right color, and the rocket still does not leave the pad until that one person says a single word out loud. Go. If they say, hold, it holds. If they say no, it does not fly. That is the job. It is the loneliest switch in the building, and in 2024, they gave it to me. I did not take it lightly. I have never taken anything lightly in my life, and I was not about to start with the one launch that meant more to me than any other, because the payload riding that rocket was the keystone of the constellation. It was the satellite that, once on station, would close the gap for good. The gap that took Daniel. After 11 years, the thing I had been steering toward since I stood beside my mother holding a folded flag was finally sitting on top of a rocket, and the word that would send it up was going to come out of my mouth. My deputy was a young captain named Priya Anand, 29, sharp as anything, the kind of officer I had been at her age and hoped I had become a better version of. In the weeks before the launch, she watched me work, and she started to understand, the way good deputies do, that this one was not like the others for me. She never asked why. She just got quieter and more careful around it, which is its own kind of respect. The night before launch night, she found me still at my desk past midnight, going over the payload review schedule for the third time. "You do not have to do the walk down yourself, ma'am," she said. "The team is good." "They are," I told her. "This one I do myself." She nodded and left it there. She understood that there are some things you carry with your own hands, or you do not carry them at all. So that was where 11 years had brought me. To a launch, to a switch, to a single word, and to a promise made on a back step to a boy with a telescope. Finally close enough to keep. I should have known that something would try to get in the way at the very end. Something always does. I just never imagined it would be a man in my own uniform who did not know my face. Launch night came in clear and cold, a February sky so sharp you could have counted the stars Daniel and I used to argue about. I got to the operations center early, the way I always do, and I walked the floor before the floor filled up, when it was just the consoles and the big countdown clock and the low hum of machines that never sleep. I love a launch floor when it is empty. It is the only time it is quiet. After that, it belongs to everyone. The operations floor is a wide, dim room built in tiers, consoles stepping down toward the front wall where the screens live, and a raised command tier at the back where the senior leadership sits. Each station has its own job and its own light, and when a count is running, the whole place glows like the inside of a machine, because that is what it is. I have stood on that floor for 100 operations. I knew every seat in it. I did not yet know the one man who would forget who I was. The command party comes in together, usually, the generals and the senior civilians, a small procession with its own small ceremony. I am technically part of that party, but I have never liked entering that way, with the entourage and the nods. So that night, as the count moved toward its built-in hold, I peeled off and took the back corridor down to do my final payload review in person. I wanted to put my own eyes on the last of it. I wanted, if I am honest, a few minutes alone with the thing before I had to send it away. 11 years. You are allowed a few minutes. I was in working uniform, the everyday utilities, with my rank in the subdued thread that does not catch the eye, low on the chest the way it sits. No dress blues, no fanfare, nothing that announced a colonel at 40 paces. Just a woman in the same camouflage everyone on that floor was wearing, walking back from a quiet room with her mind on a payload and a brother in a sky. I have thought about that a great deal since. How easy I was to mistake. How little I looked, in that moment, like the most important person in the building. The man who would mistake me was Major Caleb Mercer, 34, and that night was his floor to keep. He was the operations and security officer for the shift, newly assigned, freshly briefed, and badly eager to run a clean count. I have nothing against eagerness. I was eager once. But Mercer had been briefed on procedures and not on faces, which is a real gap and not entirely his fault. And he had the particular tightness of a man who has decided that the way to prove himself is to let nothing slip past him. He spent the early hours of the count checking badges and frowning at anyone he could not immediately place. The other officers noticed. You always notice the new man working too hard. He had never met me. There was no reason he should have. The Launch Decision Authority does not spend her time on the security floor. She spends it in reviews and on the net and in her own head. We had simply never crossed paths, and on any other night that would have meant nothing at all. On this night, it meant that when he turned from his sweep of the room and saw an unfamiliar woman in plain utilities standing near the most sensitive console on the floor, his brain did the simplest math it knew. Stranger, wrong place, threat to my clean count. I could feel him looking at me before he moved. You develop a sense for it, the weight of a stare that has decided something about you. I was reviewing the final polling order at the decision console, settling into the place I had earned over 11 years and 1,000 empty screens, and I felt a young major across the room look at me and conclude that I did not belong. The clock was holding at 4 minutes. That is by design, There's a built-in pause near the end for the final go and no-go pull, the last clean breath before the rocket commits. The floor was at its tightest, every station bent over its board, the air gone close, the way it does when a count is near its end. Captain Annan was at the console beside mine, feeding me the last of the readiness calls. Everything was green. Everything was exactly where it should have been, including me. And then Major Mercer crossed the floor and he put his hand on my elbow and he said the words that I will hear for the rest of my life. "You can't be in here, ma'am," he said. "This floor is launch personnel only. Let's go." I did not move. I have been moved against my will exactly never in my adult life, and I was not going to start 4 minutes from the most important word I would ever say. I looked at his hand on my arm, and then I looked at his face, young and certain and completely wrong, and I said the only thing there was to say. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be, Major." He read my stillness as defiance. I watched him decide that I was a problem, a civilian who had wandered somewhere she should not be and was now refusing to leave. The exact nightmare a security officer rehearses in his head. His jaw set, his grip did not loosen, and he made it worse, the way certainty always makes things worse, by raising his voice and calling for help. "Security," he said, not to me anymore, to the 2 uniformed personnel near the door. "Escort her out. Now, please. We are in a critical count." The floor changed. I felt it more than saw it, that ripple that goes through a room when something has gone wrong in a way no one has a script for. The junior personnel nearest me, the ones who knew exactly who I was, half rose from their seats and then froze, caught in the worst position a young officer can be in, between a major giving a direct order and a colonel they could not contradict fast enough. I saw a lieutenant open his mouth and lose his nerve. I saw Annan turn, her face going white. "Major," she started. "That's the..." And the room cut her off before she could finish because at that exact moment the net came alive. The launch net is piped through the floor speakers, and it does not wait for anyone. It cracked through the room, clear and flat and final, the voice of the launch conductor, running the count the way the count must be run. "Launch Decision Authority," the net said. "We need your go to proceed." And every head on that floor turned to me. I want to describe it exactly because it is the whole point of everything I am telling you. It was not loud, nobody gasped, the room did not erupt. It was quieter than that, and worse for him because of it. One by one, like a wave moving across a field, every face on that floor turned toward the woman a major was holding by the arm and trying to have removed. The lieutenants, the console crew, the senior controllers, the command tier at the back. All of them, turning, looking at me, because the net had just told the entire room who I was, without saying my name. I watched Major Mercer understand it, one face at a time. I have never seen a man's certainty leave him so completely. He followed the turning of the room, his eyes tracking the heads as they came around. And I watched him arrive, late, at the only possible conclusion. The arm he had been holding went light in his hand. His fingers opened on their own. His hand fell away from my elbow, as if my sleeve had gone hot. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. He stood there with his hand half raised where my arm had been, and the security personnel he had summoned stopped mid-step, looking from him to me and back, and the clock held at 4 minutes, waiting, because the whole countdown was waiting on the woman he had just tried to throw off the floor. For one long second, nobody on that floor moved or spoke. The net had asked its question, the room had answered it, and the only person who had not yet caught up was the man standing closest to me, the one who had been so sure. I let the silence sit exactly as long as it needed to, not to punish him. I want to be clear about that, because the easy version of this story is the one where I enjoyed it, and I did not. I let it sit because a count is not the place for a scene, and because the kindest thing I could do for that young major and for my own launch was to put the room back together, fast and clean. But before I could, someone else moved. Major General Edward Calloway came down off the command tier. He was the launch commander that night, 58 years old, 30-some years in the service. A big, quiet man who had seen more launches than most of the room had seen birthdays. He did not hurry. Senior officers who are sure of themselves never hurry. He crossed the floor to where Mercer stood, frozen, and me sat steady. And he spoke at a normal volume that somehow reached every corner of that silent room. "Major Mercer," he said, "this is Colonel Reyes. your launch decision authority. Nothing on that pad flies without her word. Stand down. It was not cruel. That is the thing I respected most about how Calloway did it. He did not raise his voice. He did not humiliate the man past the humiliation the man had already earned for himself. He simply stated the fact of the matter, the chain of authority that Mercer had just tried to override, and he let the fact do the work. Stand down. 2 words. The whole room exhaled. Mercer came to attention. To his credit, and I will give him this much, he did not stammer excuses or try to argue. Some men, caught that wrong, get loud. He went still and pale and he said, "Yes, sir." And he stepped back, and the security personnel melted away to their posts, and the floor began, slowly, to turn back to its boards. I stood and moved to the decision console, my console, and I looked at Major Mercer once more before I sat. He was waiting for it, I think, waiting for the colonel he had manhandled to take her turn now that the room was hers. I have watched a lot of people brace for a blow that they have earned. I did not give him one. "You were doing your job, Major," I said evenly, "just for him. Now let me do mine." Then I sat down and I put my hand on the console and I let the room and the Major and the whole humiliating tangle of it fall away because I had a poll to run and a promise to keep, and 4 minutes was not very long at all. Here's what nobody on that floor knew as they settled back into their seats and the count prepared to resume. They thought the pause had been about a Major's mistake. A new officer, a wrong call, an awkward 30 seconds that would make a good story in the bar later. That is what they thought they had just watched. They were wrong. The pause had not been about Major Mercer at all. He was not even a footnote to what was actually happening in that room. As I pulled up the go and no-go board, the rows of stations I was about to poll one by one, my mind did the thing it always does in the quiet before a decision. It went to the back step. It went to a cracked telescope and a little boy in my lap. It went to a stiff new uniform and a grin and a voice saying, "You watch the sky, I will watch the ground. Between us, we have got the whole thing covered." It went to a folded flag and a number, 90 seconds. Every person in that room thought the pause was about a Major's mistake. It was not. It was about a promise I made to a boy with a telescope and a payload that was finally, after 11 years, going to keep it. I breathed in. I breathed out. The grief folded itself away under the procedure, the way it had learned to over 11 years, present but quiet, riding along underneath the work instead of on top of it. That is a skill nobody teaches you. You learn it or you do not survive a job like mine. I had learned it standing beside my mother. I was using it now. Captain Annan slid into the seat beside me and put the final readiness summary in front of me without a word. Her hands were steady again. I caught her eye, just for a second, and I saw that she understood something had just happened that was bigger than the Major, even if she could not have said what. Good deputies feel the weather in a room. She had felt it. She did not ask. She just got ready to help me do the thing I was there to do. Behind me, at the back of the floor, Major Mercer had taken a post against the wall where a corrected officer goes to be small. I did not look at him again, but I was aware of him, the way you are aware of a man who has just learned something he will not forget. I felt no triumph about it. What I felt mostly was the strange double weight of the moment, the public foolishness of being grabbed, and the private enormity of what I was about to do, sitting side by side in the same 4 minutes. The controllers around me snapped fully back into rhythm, the board in front of me filled with green. The room reformed itself around the console where I sat, the way it should have been arranged all along, with the launch decision authority at the center of the count and everyone else turned toward her, waiting. It had taken a Major's mistake and a general's 2 words to put the room in its proper shape. Now it was there. I let myself have 1 more second with Daniel. Just 1. I thought, this is the one, Danny. This is the one that closes it. Then I set him down gently, the way I had learned to, and I reached for the net, and I became, fully and only, the officer the country was paying to make this single call. The grief would be there when I was done. It is always there when I am done, but for the next 4 minutes, the only thing that existed was the rocket, the payload, the pole, and the word. General Calloway returned to the command tier. He gave me a single nod from across the floor, the kind that says the floor is yours, Colonel, in your own time. I returned it, and then I keyed the net. This is the launch decision authority, I said. Begin the final go and no-go poll. A launch pole is one of the most disciplined things human beings do together. It is a call and a response, station by station, each controller giving their go or their no-go in a clear voice, no hedging, no maybes. I had run it many times. I had never run it with this much riding on it, and so I ran it exactly the same as always, because the entire discipline of the thing is that you do not let what is riding on it change how you do it. That is the job. Steady hands on the most important night, especially on the most important night. Booster, I said. Booster is go, came the reply. Propulsion, go. Guidance, go. Range. Range is green, you are go. Payload. And there was the smallest pause on the net, half a second, because the payload officer knew, the way a few of them knew, what this particular payload was and what it meant, and then his voice came back, steady. Payload is go, Colonel. One by one, every station, every system, every safeguard reported in. Green after green after green. I checked each one against the board, against my own memory, against 11 years of learning what right looked like. I was looking, the way I always look, for the one thing wrong. That is the whole value of a human in the chair, not to say go. A machine can say go. A human is there to find the reason to say no, if a reason exists, in the last seconds, when everyone wants to hear yes. I looked. There was no reason. Everything was exactly, beautifully, boringly right. The clock was ready to come off its hold. The launch conductor's voice came across the net, formal and final. Launch decision authority, the conductor said. The vehicle is ready. The range is green. All stations report, go. We are holding for your word. There it is, the loneliest switch in the building. I had imagined this moment for 2 years, and underneath that, in a way I had never admitted to anyone, I had been moving toward it for 11. Everyone on that floor was holding their breath. Behind me, a corrected major was watching the woman he had tried to remove hold the entire launch in the palm of her hand. Beside me, a young captain was holding hers. And somewhere very far away and very long ago, a boy with a telescope was waiting for his sister to bring him back a piece of the sky. I keyed the net. My voice did not shake. I had made sure, 11 years ago, standing beside my mother, that when this moment came, my voice would not shake. This is the launch decision authority, I said. We are go for launch. The clock came off its hold and began to run. The last minutes are not really minutes. They are a held breath with numbers on it. I watched the board and listened to the net and felt the floor lean forward as one body toward the front wall, where the feed from the pad showed the vehicle standing in its own light, venting, alive, ready. 10, 9, 8. The count is spoken aloud on the floor, all of us saying it together without meaning to, the only time that disciplined room ever speaks in one voice. 7, 6, 5. I thought about 90 seconds. 4, 3. I thought about a flag folded into a triangle. 2. I thought, this one comes on time, Danny. 1. The rocket lit. On the front wall, the base of the vehicle bloomed into a hard white light, the same hot bloom that a missile-warning satellite is built to see, except this one was ours and it was rising, and for one held second it sat on its own fire and did not move. The way they never seemed to move at first, and then it climbed. It climbed slowly, and then not slowly at all, and the light of it filled the screens and washed pale across every upturned face on that floor. And the room made a sound, not a cheer exactly, more like the sound a room makes when it has been holding its breath for 4 minutes and finally does not have to. I did not make a sound. I watched the light climb, and I felt 11 years lift off the ground with it. There was one tear, and I will admit to the one, but I did not let it fall on the net because the operation was not over and the launch decision authority does not weep into a live count. I blinked it back. I watched my brother's promise ride a column of fire into a February sky so clear you could count the stars. And I thought, very quietly, where only I could hear it, covered. The whole thing is covered now. The vehicle cleared the tower and rolled onto its track, and the calls kept coming. Clean and green, the rocket doing exactly what 11 years of work had built it to do. I stayed in the chair and ran the operation through the milestones that follow a launch, because that is also the job. The part nobody puts in the movies, the long, careful minutes after the pretty part is over. Only when the payload had separated cleanly and reported healthy on its way to orbit did I let myself sit back. Just an inch, and breathe all the way to the bottom of my lungs for the first time in what felt like a decade. The floor was alive now, the good kind of alive, controllers shaking hands and clapping shoulders, the tension breaking into the particular joy of people who have done a hard thing right. Annan turned to me with her eyes shining, and she did not say anything either, because she had figured out by then that words were not what this was for. She just put her hand flat on the console next to mine for a second. I put mine over it. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. It was a while before I thought about Major Mercer again, and when I did, it was because General Calloway had already gotten to him. I watched it from across the floor, the way the general drew the major aside into the relative quiet near the wall, the way he stood close and spoke low. I could not hear it and did not need to. I knew the shape of it. A senior officer, calm and unsparing, telling a junior one a truth he would carry the rest of his career. I learned later, more or less, what was said. You will learn every face that can stop a count before you stand another floor, Calloway told him. Every single one. Do you understand me, Major? And Mercer said, Yes, sir, and meant it down to the floor. His standing on that floor had not been taken from him by me. He had spent it himself, all of it, in the space of 30 seconds, with one wrong hand on one wrong arm. That is how it usually goes. We mostly do our worst damage to ourselves. Later that night, when the floor had thinned and the adrenaline had drained into the bone tiredness that always follows, General Calloway found me by the coffee. He asked me quietly whether I wanted to file anything on the major. He would have supported it. We both knew that grabbing the launch decision authority and trying to have her removed mid-count was, on paper, the kind of thing that ends a young officer's trajectory. The paperwork would have been easy. It would even have been fair. I thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved, which was not long. He stopped for the right reason, sir, I said. He just stopped the wrong person. He thought he was protecting the count. He was wrong about who I was, not about whether the count was worth protecting. Let him carry that. He will carry it harder and longer than any letter would make him. Calloway looked at me for a moment, and then he nodded, the way a man nods when you have confirmed something he already believed about you. All right, Colonel, he said. Your call. It usually is. I did not do it to be kind, although I suppose it was kind. I did it because I have spent my whole life around the difference between people who use their authority to fix things and people who use it to feed themselves, and I knew which one I wanted to be on the most important night of my career. A letter in that young man's file would have fed something small in me. Letting him carry the lesson instead fed nothing in me at all, and that is exactly how I knew it was the right thing. The best uses of power are the ones that give you nothing back. I drove home as the sky was going from black to the deep blue that comes before dawn, and I rolled the window down even though it was February and cold, because I wanted the air. Somewhere above me, climbing toward its station, was the satellite. By the time it reached orbit and opened its eyes, I thought it would be watching the very kind of thing that had reached my brother too late. It would not be late. I had made sure, with my own hands and my own word, that it would not be late. The weeks after a launch are strange, and the weeks after that launch were the strangest of my life. Because a thing I had been carrying for 11 years was suddenly, finally, set down. You would think that would feel like joy, and parts of it did. But mostly it felt like the silence after a long noise you had stopped noticing, the ringing quiet that tells you how loud the thing had been. The satellite went through its on-orbit checkout, the long methodical process of waking up a spacecraft and testing every system before it joins the network for real. I followed every milestone. Each one came back clean. And then, some weeks on, the day came when it was declared operational, which is a dry word for an enormous thing. Operational means it is no longer a project or a hope or a promise. It means it is on station, eyes open, doing the job. It means that the gap I had spent 11 years closing was, as of that day, closed. I want to tell you what operational means in the only terms that have ever mattered to me. It means minutes, sometimes seconds. It means that somewhere a unit on the ground, a unit full of somebody's little brothers, will get a warning that arrives in time instead of 90 seconds late. They will never know it was close. They will never know my name or Daniel's, or that a woman sat in a chair on a cold February night and sent up the thing that bought them those seconds. That is exactly how it should be. Nobody throws a parade for the people who catch the thing before it lands. I had made my peace with that at 26. At 45, sending up the satellite that would do the catching, I finally understood it as a kind of grace rather than a kind of slight. Major Mercer did not disappear after that night, the way you might expect a humiliated man to. That surprised me, and it is the thing that started to change my mind about him. A smaller man would have transferred or sulked or spent his energy resenting the colonel who had made him look foolish, even though I had done no such thing to him. Mercer did the opposite. He studied, he stayed on the floor, and he learned it, the faces, the names, the whole quiet architecture of authority he had failed to respect. He started showing up early, he started knowing who everyone was. I heard, secondhand, that he had quietly pulled my record, and that he had found, in it, my brother. I do not know exactly what he learned or how he learned it, but the way he carried himself toward me afterward told me he had learned the part that mattered. For my own part, I lived in the letdown. There is a particular loneliness to finishing the thing your whole life pointed at. While you are still climbing the mountain organizes everything, your days, your fights, your grief. Take the mountain away and you're standing on flat ground for the first time in 11 years, and the flatness is dizzying. I would catch myself reaching for the old urgency and find it gone, the way you reach for a railing that has been removed. I went home to the boxes I kept of Daniel, his letters, a photo of the two of us in our 2 uniforms, the cracked telescope I had never been able to throw away. I sat with them more than I had in years. The promise was kept. The keeping did not bring him back. Both of those things were true at once, and I had to learn to hold them both, which is its own slow work. I was good at the launch. I was less good, at first, at what came after the launch. I think a lot of people who carry a mission for a long time discover the same thing. The mission protects you from the grief by giving you something to do with it. Finish the mission, and the grief is just grief again, undisguised. I do not say this to be sad. I say it because it is the truth of how these things actually go, and because the easy story would skip it. And I promised myself a long time ago I would not tell easy stories about Daniel. So there were 2 of us changed by that night, moving in 2 directions. I was coming down off a decade-long climb into a quiet I did not know how to occupy. Mercer was climbing back up from the worst 30 seconds of his career, rebuilding something in himself that he had broken on my arm. Neither of us was finished. Neither of us was where we were going to end up. But we were both, in our separate ways, doing the honest work of becoming. And I have come to believe that is the only work that ever really counts. Not the launch, the becoming. The satellite watched over its piece of the sky, silent and faithful, doing the thing it was built to do for people who would never know it existed. And down here, 2 officers who had collided in the worst possible way carried what that night had given each of them, and waited, without knowing they were waiting, to find out what the collision had actually been for. It was about a month after the satellite went operational that Major Mercer asked to speak with me. He did it correctly, through proper channels, a request for a few minutes of my time, no ambush, no cornering me by the coffee. I respected that. I told my aide to put him on the calendar. I will admit I did not know what to expect. Apologies are not the strong suit of men who have been publicly wrong, in my experience. Most of them would rather pretend it never happened. He came in and he stood at attention until I told him to be at ease, and then he did the thing I did not expect. He did not make an excuse. He did not say he had been new, or briefed badly, or under pressure, all of which were true, and all of which would have been a way of handing the weight back to me. He looked at me, and he said the truth, which is the hardest thing a person can do after they have been wrong in front of a crowd. I put my hands on the one person that launch could not happen without, he said, and the part that keeps me up is that I would have done it to anyone I did not recognize. It was not about you, ma'am. That is what scares me. I had decided I was the kind of officer who keeps a clean floor, and I found out I was the kind of officer who would manhandle someone out of a room because I had already decided who mattered and who did not. I do not want to be that. I am asking you to help me not be that. I have thought a great deal about why those words landed the way they did. I think it is because he had found the real fault. which was not that he had embarrassed himself in front of the general, but that he had been willing to treat a human being as a problem to be removed before he knew the first true thing about her. That is a deeper fault than rudeness, and it takes a real person to name it in themselves out loud. I did not wave it away. That would have been easy, and it would have been a lie, and I do not lie to make a room more comfortable. I do not need you to be sorry, Major, I told him. Sorry is cheap and it is over fast. I need you to be the kind of officer who would have stopped a 4-star general the same way you stopped me, by the book, because the count is the count. And I need you to be the kind of officer who would have heard the correction the same way too, fast and clean, without his pride getting in the way. You did the second part that night. You took the correction like a professional. It was the first part you got wrong, deciding who counted before you knew. Fix that, and we are square. You will not owe me anything, he asked carefully if he could ask what the launch had meant. He had clearly found something in my record, but did not want to presume on it. So I told him about Daniel. Not all of it. You do not hand all of it to someone you have known for a month. But I told him about a brother on the ground, and a sister in the sky, and a warning that came 90 seconds late, and I told him that the satellite he had nearly delayed by manhandling its decision authority off the floor was the one built to make sure it never came late again. I watched it land on him, the full weight of what he had almost gotten in the way of, and I watched him decide to deserve having heard it. After that, things changed, slowly and for real. I am suspicious of fast forgiveness and instant friendships. They tend to be performances. What grew between Major Mercer and me was neither fast nor a friendship exactly. It was something better suited to who we were, a professional trust, built shift by shift, out of small things done right. I watched him run floors over the following weeks, and he ran them like a different man. He learned every name on every tier. He checked himself before he checked a badge. I saw him more than once treat someone whose role he could not place with patience instead of suspicion, ask instead of assume, and I knew where that had come from. There was a night, weeks later, between operations, when the floor was nearly empty, and he and I both happened to be there late, and we ended up standing at the front wall looking at the status board, the small green lights of the constellation, including the one I had sent up. We did not say much. He asked me a quiet question about the early days of the program, and I answered it, and we stood there a while longer, 2 officers on an empty floor, the worst night between us long enough ago to look at directly. It was not warm exactly. It was honest, which is more than warm, and lasts longer. He had begun where no relationship should begin, with his hand on my arm and a wrong assumption in his head, and he had done the long, unglamorous work of becoming someone I could stand beside as something close to an equal. I have a lot of respect for that. It is harder than it looks to come back from your worst moment instead of just hiding from it. I tell you about Mercer, not because he is the hero of this story. He is not. He is barely even the villain. He was just a young man who was wrong and then chose, harder than most people choose, to be better. I tell you about him because the easy version of my story ends with him humiliated and me vindicated, and that version would be a lie about what actually mattered that night, and a lie about who I want to be. The launch was never about him. My dignity was never going to be built out of his embarrassment. If anything good came to him out of that night, it cost me nothing. And it means the night made 2 things instead of breaking one. I will take that. I will take that every time. Time has a way of folding over after a thing like that launch so that the weeks stop announcing themselves and simply pass. The satellite did its silent work. The floor went back to its rhythm of operations and stand-downs, and I went about the strange business of living on the far side of a promise I had finally kept. Word reached me eventually in the careful and partial way that such word travels when most of it is not yours to know. There had been a moment, somewhere, sometime, when the network had given a clean early warning to forces on the ground. A real one, the kind that arrives in time. I was not read into the details, and I did not ask for them. I did not need them. I only needed the shape of it, which was this. Somewhere, a unit got the seconds it needed because the eyes I had spent 11 years putting in the sky were open and watching. The 90 seconds finally inverted. Given back instead of taken. I did not celebrate. I have never once celebrated that kind of news, and I never will, because behind every warning that arrives in time is a danger that was real. And behind the danger are people who did not get to know how close it came. But I sat with it, alone, for a long, quiet evening. I let myself feel the thing I had been chasing since I was 34 and standing beside my mother. Not victory, not even satisfaction, exactly. Something steadier than both. The sense of a debt not paid off, because some debts cannot be paid off, but honored, carried correctly, turned finally into something that protected somebody else's brother. I found myself taking stock the way you do when the thing that organized your life is suddenly done. I had spent 23 years in uniform, and 11 of them aimed at a single satellite, and now the satellite was up. And the question of what came next was sitting there waiting for me to look at it. I could keep climbing. There were stars in my future if I wanted them, the general's tier, the bigger commands. Part of me wanted that, the part that has always wanted to do more, watch more, protect more. But another part of me had started thinking about the young officers, about Anand and the lieutenant who had frozen with his mouth open that night, and even about Mercer, all of them learning a job that nobody can really teach you in a briefing, the job of holding still and watching and being right when being right is invisible. Somebody had taught me that, an older officer on a long overnight with a hard, true sentence about parades. Maybe my half of the sky in the years I had left was supposed to be handed to the people who would watch it after me. I did not decide. I just let the question turn over, which is its own kind of progress for a person like me. One evening I took down the boxes again, Daniel's letters, the photo of us in our 2 uniforms, the cracked telescope. I reread his last letter, the one I have read more times than I could count, and there, in his own terrible handwriting, was the line. "You watch the sky," he had written, signing off the way he always did. "I will watch the ground. Between us, we have got the whole thing covered." He had written it as a joke, the same as he had said it on the back step, 2 kids dividing up the heavens. I sat with the letter in my hands, and I understood that the promise was kept now. Fully, finally, and that keeping it had not brought him back and never would. Both true, still both true. I have stopped expecting the 2 truths to resolve into one. They do not. You just carry them, one in each hand, and you keep walking. It was Anand, of all people, who asked me the question that pushed me toward the answer. We were closing down the floor late one night, just the 2 of us and the hum, and she asked me, in the easy way she had earned the right to ask me things, why I had spent my whole career on the unglamorous job. Missile warning, acquisition, the chair nobody dreams about as a kid. Why not the cockpit, the command, the things that come with a story you can tell at a party? She did not ask it to challenge me. She asked it because she was 29 and standing at the same fork I had stood at. And she wanted to know what the quiet road was actually worth. I opened my mouth to answer her, and I realized, standing there, that I finally had an answer worth handing down. 11 years of carrying it had turned it into something I could actually say. I knew exactly what I wanted to tell her, about the sky and the ground and the seconds and the brothers, about being the person who catches the thing before it lands, and never getting thanked and learning to find that beautiful instead of bitter. I knew for the first time all of it in words. But I am going to tell you the answer before I told her, because you have come all this way with me, and because the answer is really for anyone who has ever been treated like they were not in the room that mattered. Here is what I know after 23 years and 11 of them aimed at the sky. The world will mistake you. Sooner or later, someone certain and well-meaning and completely wrong will put a hand on your arm and tell you that you do not belong in the room you have spent your whole life earning your way into. It will sting. It is supposed to sting. And when it happens, you will have a choice. And the choice is the whole thing. You can spend your strength proving them wrong, loudly in the moment, making a scene out of your own worth. Or you can stand still and let the truth do what the truth does, which is arrive on its own, in its own time, and rearrange the whole room without your having to raise your voice. I learned that watching an empty screen at 26. I learned it again on a cold February night at 45. With a major's hand on my elbow and a countdown holding for my word. The hand did not change who I was. The hand was never going to change who I was. All I had to do was be who I was, steadily, while the room caught up. The net asked its question, the room turned, the hand fell away, and the rocket flew on my word, the same as it would have if no one had doubted me at all, because the doubt of a person who does not know you has exactly no power over the truth of what you are. I sat with Daniel's telescope that morning after, in the blue light before dawn, and I told him the thing I had crossed an entire career to be able to tell him. "You watch the ground, Danny," I said out loud. "To a brother who has been gone 11 years, I have got the sky. The whole thing is covered now. It comes on time from here on out. I promise you, it comes on time." The sky was going pale at the edge, the way it does, the stars we used to argue about, winking out, one by one, as the light came up. I did not feel triumphant. I want you to understand that, because we have been taught that the end of a story like this is supposed to be triumphant, the villain humbled, the doubter crushed. I did not feel any of that. What I felt was peace. The deep, plain, ordinary peace of a promise kept and a duty honored and a debt turned, after 11 years, into something that protects the living. The Major learned, the room remembered, the satellite watches. And I am still here, under the same sky I have spent my whole life defending, finally at rest beneath it. If anybody ever tells you that you are not really in the room where it matters, that your kind of service is too quiet to count, that you should move along and let the people who look the part handle it, I want you to do what I did. Do not argue. Do not perform your worth for them. Just stand exactly where you have earned the right to stand, and wait, and let the truth turn the room. It will. It always does. The truth does not need to shout. It only needs to be true. If you have ever done the quiet kind of work that nobody throws a parade for, the kind where being right is invisible, and being thanked never comes, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Do you think I made the right call, letting that Major carry the lesson instead of filing on him? Have you ever had to stand still and let the truth turn a room instead of fighting for it out loud? And if you have ever turned a loss into something that protects other people, tell me about it, because those are the stories I read first. If this one stayed with you, hit subscribe and tell me your story below.